For years, the Smith family was held up as a symbol of a new kind of celebrity household, one that claimed it didn't hide behind polished interviews or carefully scripted appearances. Instead, they leaned into openness, sharing thoughts about love, pain, and growth in a way that made millions of people feel like they were listening to a private conversation rather than a public performance. But as time passed, something shifted. Old clips, casual comments, and moments that once felt refreshing began to take on a different tone. Viewers started asking whether honesty had quietly crossed into something else entirely. Jaden's recent reflections didn't arrive as a sudden explosion, but more like a slow realization that what was once presented as healing might also have been revealing deeper fractures. The more people revisited the past, the more they noticed how often personal struggles were shared in public spaces, turning private family moments into cultural talking points. And that raised an uncomfortable question that lingered beneath every headline and interview. Were these stories being told for understanding, or had they become part of a public narrative that no one in the family could truly step away from anymore?
One of the moments that resurfaced again and again in online discussions was a conversation that originally aired years earlier, a moment that many people barely noticed at the time. It involved a young voice at a table meant for adults, speaking in a space where the lines between family and audience had already blurred. Back then, it was praised as bold and honest, a sign that this family wasn't afraid to tackle uncomfortable topics head-on. But as the clip circulated again, viewers began to hear it differently. What once sounded like openness now felt, to some, like exposure. The internet has a way of preserving every word, every expression, and every pause, allowing moments to be reinterpreted long after the context has faded. People began asking whether a child should have been placed in that position at all, discussing grown-up issues in a space watched by millions. The shift in public reaction wasn't loud or immediate, but it was steady. And as more people replayed that conversation, they started to see it not as an isolated moment, but as part of a broader pattern of how this family chose to live their lives in full view of the world.
Jada's own words became another focal point in this growing conversation. Over the years, she spoke openly about her struggles, her past, and the mistakes she believed shaped who she became. For some, her honesty felt brave, a way of breaking down stigma around mental health and personal challenges. For others, it felt like too much, especially when those stories involved the people closest to her. The line between personal truth and shared family experience became harder to see. Critics began to wonder whether these public confessions were helping her children understand their own lives, or whether they were placing a weight on them that they never asked to carry. Each interview, each admission, added another layer to a story that was no longer just hers. It became a family narrative, one that fans, commentators, and strangers all felt entitled to analyze. And as the discussions grew louder, the idea of privacy started to feel almost foreign. What began as a platform for healing slowly turned into a place where every personal struggle became a headline, and every attempt at honesty sparked another wave of debate.
Then came the moment that pushed this family's story into a completely different space in the public mind. A relationship described with a single word that quickly became part of pop culture sparked endless conversation, jokes, and arguments across the internet. When Will and Jada sat down to talk about it, the world watched closely, reading between every line, every expression, and every pause. For some, it was a raw display of two people trying to work through something deeply personal. For others, it felt like a private matter turned into a public reckoning. Jada's later memoir reopened the story, adding details that reignited old debates and raised new ones. The idea of transparency, once celebrated, began to feel complicated. People questioned whether sharing so much in public helped them move forward, or whether it locked them into a version of their story that could never fully change.
And while the spotlight stayed fixed on that relationship, attention quietly shifted to how their children were navigating life under the same unblinking gaze. Jaden's path began to look increasingly different from the traditional celebrity journey people expected. Instead of leaning into fame, he spoke about stepping back, about searching for meaning beyond red carpets and headlines. His comments about identity, personal freedom, and alternative approaches to healing made waves of their own. Some saw him as thoughtful and introspective, someone trying to carve out a life that didn't revolve around the industry he was born into. Others saw it as a form of rebellion, a response to growing up in a world where every thought and feeling could become public property. His words suggested a desire to understand himself outside of his family's story, even as that story continued to follow him. The more he spoke about finding peace and breaking away from expectations, the more people wondered whether his journey was shaped as much by what he experienced at home as by the pressures of fame itself.
Just as the focus seemed to settle, another voice entered the conversation, bringing with it serious claims and legal consequences. A former friend of the family stepped forward with allegations that quickly moved from online discussions into the courtroom. The mention of lawsuits and defamation shifted the tone of the entire narrative. What had once been framed as celebrity drama now carried real-world stakes, measured in legal filings and potential judgments. The public began to watch not just for statements or interviews, but for official outcomes. The idea that rumors could turn into evidence made everything feel heavier, more permanent. Each claim, each response, added to a growing sense that this story was no longer just about public opinion, but about accountability in a legal sense. And as the case unfolded, it raised a broader question about how far a public narrative can go before it becomes something that must be settled beyond headlines and social media. In the end, the story of this family started to feel less like a series of individual moments and more like a larger reflection on what it means to live in constant view of the world. Growing up under the weight of fame, cameras, and public commentary leaves little room for mistakes to fade quietly. Every choice, every word becomes part of a record that can be replayed and reinterpreted at any time. Jaden and Willow's lives became symbols in a conversation about whether